He slid a velvet ring box across the marble table and said her name like a warning. The gala room shimmered under crystal chandeliers, every cut glass pendant scattering white light over black tuxedos, silver trays, and the thin, sharp smiles of people who loved an audience more than the truth. Maya stood near the edge of the room with both hands wrapped around a flute of untouched champagne, the glass sweating against her fingers. Across from her, Daniel lifted his chin as though the entire ballroom had been built to witness his triumph. "You came after all," he said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. A few heads turned, a few mouths curved. Maya didn't answer. She only looked at the woman beside him in the pale, expensive dress, the one wearing the ring Daniel had clearly chosen for its size rather than its meaning. The woman's laugh was soft and rehearsed. Daniel's hand rested at her waist like a claim. Then came the next blow, delivered with a smile. "I figured you'd want to see me move on properly." The words landed cleanly, polished as the silverware, and around them the room went still in that polite, dangerous way wealthy people do silence. Maya lowered her glass to the linen-covered table. The ice inside clicked once, a small cold sound lost beneath the murmur of the orchestra. No one could have known that 3 hours earlier she had almost not come at all. 3 hours earlier, her phone had lit up on the kitchen counter of her apartment, a plain, narrow space with one cracked window and the scent of fresh coffee still clinging to the air. The message had been brief. "Be at the gala. With a blue dress. Adrian." She had stared at the name for a long second before folding the note in half and slipping it into the pocket of the dress hanging on her bedroom door. She had met Adrian only once, in a lobby of a downtown building where the floors gleamed like water and the air carried the clean scent of cedar and rain-damp wool. He had spoken to her without looking down, without pity, without that careful voice people used when they thought she had already been broken. He had simply said, "You should never apologize for standing where you belong." Daniel had never spoken to her like that. Daniel had once loved her loudly, then abandoned her just as loudly, leaving behind half-packed drawers, a wedding band on the bathroom sink, and enough humiliation to make her move into a one-bedroom apartment with a folding chair and a borrowed lamp. Tonight, he looked polished, smug, and certain she would shrink under the chandelier light. Instead, Maya set her glass down, smoothed one hand over the blue silk at her waist, and stepped forward. The room watched her as if she were walking toward a trap. Daniel's smile widened, ready to enjoy whatever he thought came next. But before he could speak again, a new sound rolled through the ballroom entrance. Measured footsteps on polished stone, followed by the quiet, unmistakable pause of a room sensing power before it was named. Maya turned her head. Adrian had arrived, and Daniel's expression changed first. Adrian's arrival did not announce itself with noise. It arrived in the way a storm changes pressure. The ballroom seemed to tighten around him. Candlelight from the crystal fixtures caught the sharp edge of his jaw, and the black wool of his tuxedo absorbed the gold glow as if it had been made to stand out in rooms like this. Conversations thinned into murmurs. Daniel's hand, still half raised from whatever smug remark he had been about to make, lowered by an inch. Maya felt the shift more than she saw it. Adrian stopped beside her without hurry, the polished toe of his shoe touching the marble in a quiet, deliberate step. He did not look at the crowd first. He looked at her. "You came," she said softly, because that was the only thing her mouth trusted. The corner of his mouth moved, almost not a smile. "You said this mattered." Behind them, the ballroom chandeliers trembled in the air conditioning, sending fractured light across the glassware and white linen tables. Daniel let out a short laugh that sounded too loud in the sudden hush. "Adrian," he said, smoothing one hand over his jacket as if that could restore the room to him. "I didn't know you were still attending these little charity theatrics." Adrian turned, slow enough to make every eye follow. "Then you've been relying on old information," he said. His voice was level, low, and carried farther than Daniel's because no one in the room had to lean in to hear power. Maya watched Daniel's face lose a shade of color. Around them, forks stopped midair. A woman near the bar lifted her phone and then lowered it again, unsure whether this was a photo, or a warning. Daniel recovered with a practiced grin and stepped closer, angling his body as if he still owned the room. "If this is about Maya," he said, "you should know she doesn't belong in our world anymore." Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for Maya's hand, and the warmth of his palm was steady against the cool air drifting from the vents above. The gesture was small. The room treated it like a declaration. Maya's fingers closed around his once, then held. Daniel's smile flattened. "What is this?" he asked. "Some kind of performance?" Adrian's gaze stayed on him. "No." He lifted their joined hands just enough for the nearest tables to see. "It's a correction." The word landed with a clean, merciless finality. Daniel glanced from Maya's face to Adrian's, searching for the seam in the moment, the place where the joke was supposed to begin. But the ballroom had already chosen sides. One of the event organizers, all silver hair and nervous posture, hurried across the carpet with a folder pressed to her chest. She stopped beside Adrian as if approaching a judge. "Mr. Cross," she said, voice unsteady, "we were just about to begin the donor announcements." Adrian accepted the folder without looking at it. The paper made a soft, dry sound in his hands. He opened it, scanned the page once, and slid it back closed. Then he looked at Daniel. "Before you speak to her again," he said, "you should understand something about your position here." Daniel's jaw tightened. The music from the string quartet had not resumed. Even the glasses behind the bar seemed louder now, the faint clink of crystal against ice carrying across the silence. Maya could feel every set of eyes moving between them, waiting for the sentence that would split the night open. Adrian stepped half a pace forward, still holding her hand, and the chandeliers burned above them like suspended fire. "You're going to listen carefully," he said, "because by the end of this evening, you will either apologize to Maya in front of everyone, or you will leave this room with far less than you arrived with." The room held its breath. Even the bartender had stopped polishing the glass in his hand, the white towel hanging motionless against the counter. Adrian did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The low, controlled edge in it carried farther than a shout ever could. Daniel's fingers curled at his side, then loosened. He glanced toward the circle of guests gathered beneath the chandeliers, faces lit gold and sharp as cut crystal. Maya stood beside Adrian in a dress the color of midnight water, the satin catching every flicker of light when she shifted her weight. His hand rested at the small of her back, steady and unmistakable, and when Daniel's stare landed on it, Adrian only tightened his hold by a fraction, as if to make the point in silence. "You know what position you're in," Adrian said, sliding one cufflink back into place with measured calm. "The only question is whether you want to keep it." Daniel let out a short laugh that sounded wrong in the hush, brittle around the edges. "You're threatening me over her?" Adrian's gaze stayed level. "I'm correcting you over yourself." A ripple moved through the room, a few guests tilting their heads, the soft rustle of silk and sequins brushing against the string quartet's empty chairs. Maya watched Daniel's face change by degrees, as if he were trying to find a version of the night where this still belonged to him. Then Adrian turned slightly, enough for everyone to hear him clearly. "This stops now. You will apologize to Maya, here, in front of everyone, where you will find out exactly how expensive one bad decision can become." The silence that followed felt thick enough to touch. Someone near the bar set down a champagne flute too carefully, and the stem clicked against the marble like a tiny bell. Daniel's throat worked once. He looked at the guests, then at Maya, then back at Adrian, as if checking whether the ground beneath him had changed shape. Maya said nothing. She only lifted her chin a little, and the movement seemed to sharpen the whole room. The old man in the navy suit murmured something to his wife, but even that whisper died quickly. Daniel took one step forward, then stopped when Adrian calmly reached into his inner pocket and drew out a slim cream envelope with a black seal. He placed it on the nearby cocktail table and let his fingers rest on it for a second, like he was setting a blade down between them. "This was your invitation to understand what's happening here," Adrian said. "You ignored it." He looked at the envelope, then at Daniel. "Now you can decide whether you want to leave with your pride intact, or leave with your name attached to a very public apology. The chandelier light flashed over Daniel's ring as his hand twitched. Maya's phone buzzed once in her clutch, a soft vibration lost beneath the hush, but she didn't look down. She kept her eyes on Daniel and watched the certainty drain from his face in small, visible steps. Adrian's thumb moved once against her waist, a quiet signal, and then he said the words that turned the room colder than the marble floor beneath them. "If you still don't understand who you're speaking to," he said, "I'll introduce you properly to the man whose company pays your salary." The room stayed silent for one long beat after Adrian's words, the kind of silence that made the ice in every glass seem louder than the people holding it. Daniel's jaw flexed under the warm wash of the chandelier, and the polished marble beneath his shoes reflected him in fragments, smaller than he liked to be seen. Maya didn't move from Adrian's side. She only watched as Daniel's certainty thinned, the color in his face shifting under the amber light. Then Adrian reached for the envelope on the tray, slid out a single card, and held it between two fingers. The corner caught the light like a blade. "You came here to make a scene," he said, calm as a locked door. "Instead, you've made a problem for your employer." Around them, the murmurs started low and fast, sleeves brushing, champagne flutes tilting, the soft clink of crystal threading through the air. One of Daniel's colleagues at the back lowered his phone. Another took a step away from him. Maya felt the shift before she saw it, the room rearranging itself around power. Daniel forced out a laugh, thin and dry. "Your employer?" he said, glancing from Adrian to Maya like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Adrian didn't answer right away. He simply turned the card so Daniel could read the name embossed in black foil, then folded it closed again with the same careful patience. "The woman you walked away from," he said, "is here tonight as my guest. That means every word you say to her reflects on the people who signed your paycheck, approved your contracts, and decided your next promotion." The words landed cleanly. No raised voice, no spectacle, just the quiet sound of a door shutting. Daniel swallowed, his hand tightening around his glass until the stem gave a small, sharp crack. A waiter passed behind him carrying a silver tray, the scent of lemon, polished metal, and expensive perfume drifting through the air. Maya finally looked down at the phone buzzing in her clutch. A message from her attorney, then another. She did not open them. She just slid the phone back into place and lifted her chin a fraction. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. His hand moved once at the small of her back, not possessive, just steady like a signal to keep walking. "You should leave now," he said to Daniel, "before this becomes the only night anyone remembers you for the wrong reasons." Daniel's eyes flicked to Maya, to the silk at her shoulders, to the way she stood without flinching beneath the light that used to make her shrink. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Maya," he began, but she finally spoke, and her voice was so even it made the air feel thinner. "You don't get to call me by my name like we're still married." The nearest conversations died in pieces. A woman near the piano set her glass down too hard, and the bright note of crystal rang through the room. Daniel looked at Adrian, then back at Maya, as if he'd only just understood that the evening had already moved past him. Adrian extended the card one more time, this time not as a warning, but as a decision. "There's a car waiting outside," he said. "Take it, or stay and explain to your board why you insulted the woman I'm about to propose to." Maya didn't move when Adrian's card hovered between them like a blade wrapped in velvet. The room had gone so quiet that the soft tick of the grandfather clock near the ballroom doors sounded too loud, too deliberate. Somewhere behind her, ice clinked against a crystal tumbler. Daniel's hand tightened around his drink until the clear liquid trembled at the rim. He took one step forward, then stopped when Adrian slid his left hand into his pocket and glanced toward the entrance, as if he had all the time in the world. "You can leave with dignity," Adrian said, his tone even, "or you can stay and make a scene in front of your board." The words landed cleanly. Not loud. Worse. Around them, chairs shifted on polished wood. A woman in pearls tilted her head. A man near the windows lowered his phone without taking a picture, as if even he understood the difference between spectacle and burial. Maya's fingers closed around the edge of her clutch, the satin cool under her palm. She looked at Daniel once, just once, and the sight of him in his tailored navy suit, trying to stand taller than he felt, seemed to require more effort than he had left. Adrian noticed. He stepped slightly closer, not touching her, not claiming her, just enough to place his body between Maya and the version of the evening Daniel had tried to build. "I'm asking you one last time," he said. "Walk away." Daniel let out a short, humorless breath, the kind that scraped the back of the throat. "You don't get to show up here and rewrite everything," he said, but his voice had lost the sharp edge it wore when he first arrived. He set his glass down on a passing tray, too carefully, the crystal making a thin, ringing sound against the silver. "Maya, if this is about pride, we can talk privately." "No," she said. One syllable. Flat. Final. Adrian's mouth shifted at the corner. Not quite a smile, more a sign that he'd heard exactly what he needed. Then the entrance doors opened again, and a wash of cooler air rolled across the room, carrying the faint scent of rain and wet pavement from outside. Every head turned toward the foyer. A black sedan waited under the hotel canopy, its headlights reflected in the marble like twin white blades. Through the glass, a driver in white gloves stood beside the open rear door. The sight moved through the room faster than any whisper. Daniel followed the line of attention, and for the first time all night, he looked uncertain. Adrian reached down, took Maya's hand, and lifted it only enough for everyone to see the simple, deliberate gesture. Not possessive, not performative, certain. Then he turned toward Daniel. "I'm not asking for your approval," he said. "I'm telling you what happens next." He slipped something small and dark into Maya's hand, a key card, cold as river stone, then faced the room. "The engagement announcement is in 20 minutes, he said. "If either of you stays, I'll assume you want your names attached to the board report." Daniel's jaw flexed once. Once again, the room waited for him to roar, to sneer, to reclaim the shape of the night. Instead, he looked at Maya's hand and Adrian's for half a second too long, then at the open door, where the wind moved the edge of the hotel drapery like a curtain being drawn. When he spoke, it came out low and careful. "What board report?" Adrian's gaze didn't flicker. "The one that says you tried to leverage your position to force a woman into silence." He gave Maya's hand a final squeeze, just enough to steady, then released it and turned toward the waiting car. "And the one that says your brother owns the company you're about to embarrass yourself in." By the time Adrian's car disappeared beneath the hotel's glass canopy, the ballroom had changed its shape. The laughter that had once floated above the tables now came in short, brittle bursts, like champagne gone flat. Maya stood near the edge of the room with the key card still resting in her palm, its plastic surface chilled by the air conditioning and slick beneath her fingers. Across the polished floor, Daniel remained under the gold wash of the chandeliers, one hand in his pocket, the other gripping the stem of a crystal flute so tightly the bowl trembled. He said something to his brother, but the words were swallowed by the low hum of string music and the sudden, hungry murmur of people watching the wrong man lose control. A server passed with a tray of untouched canapes, the scent of truffle oil and butter drifting through the room, rich and expensive and strangely sharp against the tension. Maya folded the key card once, then again, and slipped it into the side pocket of her clutch. She didn't look at Daniel when she crossed toward the hotel corridor. She only felt the hush that followed her, the scrape of her heels against marble, the way the carpet runners softened every step until it sounded like the room itself was holding its breath. At the elevator bank, a woman in a navy suit approached with a tablet tucked against her chest. "Ms. Carter?" she asked, voice careful. Maya stopped. The woman extended the tablet and turned the screen toward her. "Legal has requested your signature before the engagement announcement. Mr. Cole said to bring you upstairs. Private dining room, 32nd floor." Maya took the stylus, the metal cool and smooth, and signed without blinking. The woman's eyes flicked once toward the ballroom, where Daniel had started moving again, his jaw set hard enough to shadow his cheek. "Is there a problem?" the woman asked quietly. Maya capped the stylus and handed the tablet back. Not mine. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and the light inside spilled over her like white silk. She stepped in, and as the doors began to close, she caught one last reflection in the mirrored panel. Daniel standing beneath the chandeliers, watching her leave as if he had only just understood that the night was no longer his to control. The elevator rose in silence, floor numbers glowing red one by one, until it opened onto a corridor lined with dark walnut and muted brass sconces. The carpet there was thick enough to swallow sound. Even her breathing seemed to vanish into it. At the end of the hall, a suite door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the room was all warm lamplight, a leather desk, and a broad window overlooking the city, where traffic moved like threads of amber beneath the dark. Adrian stood near the glass with his jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled to the forearm, speaking into his phone in a low, measured tone. He ended the call when he saw her and reached for the paper waiting on the desk. "You signed?" he asked. Maya gave a single nod. He slid the document toward her. "Then there's one more thing." She looked down. The heading at the top of the page was brief, formal, and irreversible. Board appointment confirmation. Her name sat beneath it in black ink. Already typed, already waiting. Adrian took the pen from the desk and set it beside her hand. "If you want out of their reach," he said, "you sign this now. If you want the man who humiliated you to answer to a board instead of a ballroom, this is the line that does it." Outside the window, a river of headlights moved through the city like a slow burn. Maya closed her fingers around the pen. The tip hovered above the signature line as downstairs, somewhere beyond the elevator banks and marble corridors, Daniel's voice rose once, sharp, searching, suddenly too late. The ballroom had been arranged like a stage built for other people's humiliation. Towering crystal chandeliers, white orchids in silver bowls, and a string quartet playing softly under the low murmur of champagne glasses. Daniel stood near the center with a woman on his arm, her dress bright as polished glass, her smile sharp enough to cut through conversation. He lifted his chin when he saw Maya cross the threshold, as if he'd been waiting all evening for the chance to perform. "You came," he said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "I was beginning to think you finally learned your place." A few people laughed into their drinks. Maya didn't answer. She moved past a column wrapped in ivory fabric, the hem of her dark dress brushing the marble floor, the sound almost lost beneath the music. Adrian remained half a step behind her, quiet in a charcoal suit that looked expensive in the way only understatement could. Daniel's gaze flicked to him, then away, dismissing him with a smug little tilt of the mouth. "I didn't invite you to bring an audience," he said. Maya set her clutch on the linen-covered table, slow and deliberate, and picked up the folded event program from beside a silver centerpiece. Her fingers smoothed the paper once. Then she turned to Daniel. "You didn't invite me," she said, her voice calm over the clink of ice and crystal. "You instructed me." The nearest guests shifted. A woman in pearls looked down at her plate. Daniel laughed, but it came out thin. "Still trying to sound important?" He took a step closer, his cuff links flashing under the lights. "You were always good at dressing up weakness and calling it dignity." Adrian's hand moved, not to interrupt, but to rest at the small of Maya's back, just enough to change the room's temperature. Daniel noticed that, too. His eyes narrowed. "And who exactly is he supposed to be?" he asked, with the lazy confidence of a man who believed every answer in the room belonged to him. Maya reached into her clutch and drew out a cream-color invitation card embossed in gold. She held it between two fingers and looked at it before speaking, as if confirming a fact rather than making a statement. "The host asked me to come downstairs early," she said. "There was a matter of ownership to settle." A ripple moved through the crowd. Somewhere near the bar, a glass set down too hard. Daniel's smile tightened. "Ownership," he repeated. Maya did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You spent years talking over me because you thought silence meant surrender," she said, and the words landed clean and precise. "Tonight, it means paperwork." Daniel's face changed by degrees, first amusement, then irritation, then something more cautious as he saw the sealed folder Adrian carried at his side. The woman on Daniel's arm shifted, suddenly uncertain, her nails pressing into her own wrist. A server passed with a tray of champagne, but no one reached for it. Adrian took one step forward, just enough to stand beside Maya instead of behind her. His voice was even almost courteous. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "you may want to check with your legal department before you keep speaking as if this floor still belongs to you." Daniel let out a short laugh, but it died before it reached the second syllable. Maya slid the invitation back into her clutch, then looked past him toward the darkened entrance of the ballroom, where several executives had just appeared with a woman carrying a leather portfolio. One of them spoke Daniel's name in a tone that sounded far less friendly than before. Daniel turned. Maya didn't. She simply folded her hands around the small silver clasp of her purse and waited, while the first sign of his control began to leave the room. The woman with the leather portfolio stopped at the edge of the ballroom light, her heels whispering over the marble as Daniel slowly turned to face her. The room had gone strangely still. Even the string quartet seemed to hold its breath beneath the low shimmer of chandeliers and the distant clink of glass. She opened the portfolio and set a single document on the nearest cocktail table, the paper crisp enough to catch the glow. Daniel's name sat at the top in bold black type. His jaw tightened. "You were told this meeting was a courtesy," the woman said, her voice flat and polished. "It is now a deadline." Maya watched him reach for the page, watched his fingers hesitate above the seal. Adrian stayed beside her, one hand loosely folded at his side, the other resting near his pocket as if this were nothing more than an ordinary evening. When Daniel finally snatched up the document, his eyes moved across the first line, then stopped. Around them, executives in tailored suits shifted in silence, the scent of cold champagne and expensive cologne mingling in the air. Daniel looked up once, sharply, toward the dark entrance where two more men had just arrived with a briefcase stamped with a corporate logo he clearly recognized. "What is this?" he asked. The answer came not from the woman, but from Adrian, who stepped forward just enough of the overhead light to catch the clean line of his face. "A notice of transfer," he said. "And if you keep pretending this company is still yours, you'll embarrass yourself in front of people who signed your checks." Daniel's grip tightened until the paper bent. Maya did not move, but her fingers closed around the silver clasp of her purse with measured care, the cool metal pressing into her palm. The woman with the portfolio reached into the folder again and drew out a second sheet, then placed it beside the first. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One of the executives lowered his head and began speaking into his phone in a hushed, urgent tone. Daniel's fiancée, standing a few feet away in a pale satin dress, had gone rigid, her glass frozen halfway to her lips. Adrian glanced at Maya, then at the room, then back to Daniel. "You've been instructing staff, moving assets, and making public statements about ownership you no longer have," he said calmly. "That ends tonight." Daniel gave a short, disbelieving laugh, but no one joined him. The sound died against the high ceilings and polished stone. Maya finally took a small step forward, the hem of her dress barely brushing the floor. She picked up the top page, scanned it once, then turned it so the seal faced Daniel. "You should have read the mail," she said, her voice quiet enough to make him lean in. "It would have saved you from speaking too soon." He stared at her, then at Adrian, and for the first time all evening the room seemed to rearrange itself around them. The men by the entrance crossed the ballroom without hurry, their shoes striking the marble in measured steps, and one of them handed the briefcase to Adrian with a respectful nod that made several heads turn at once. Daniel's face changed in a single blink. He knew that posture. He knew that recognition, but he did not yet know how deep it went. Adrian accepted the briefcase, set it on the table, and looked at Daniel with the kind of patience that only power could afford. "My brother," he said evenly, "doesn't repeat himself, and neither do I." Then he opened the case, revealing a stack of signed papers and a final page with Daniel's name already typed across the bottom, waiting for one more signature that would decide everything. Adrian closed the briefcase with one slow hand, the click sharp against the hush in the ballroom. The signed papers lay flat on the table under the white spill of the chandeliers, their edges crisp as glass. Daniel took one step forward, then stopped when Adrian slid a single page across the polished wood and set his palm over it. "You don't sign unless I say so," he said, not loudly, not even harshly, just with the kind of calm that made every word land heavier. Daniel glanced at the page, then at the men by the entrance, then at Elena. She stood in the same silver light that had once been meant to shame her, but her hands were steady at her sides, her dress catching every flare of the chandelier, like water over satin. The room had gone so quiet that even the soft hiss of the air vents seemed loud. Daniel tried to smile, but it split on the edge of his mouth. "You think this is over?" he asked. Adrian turned, and in the reflection of the mirrored wall behind him, Elena could see both men at once. One clinging to the last shape of control, the other already past it. "No," Adrian said. "I think this is where it ends." He lifted the page, and the bold signature lines were visible to everyone now, along with the clause beneath them that handed the remaining company votes, the escrow release, and the final settlement authority to Elena. A murmur moved through the guests like wind through dry leaves. Daniel's chair scraped hard against the marble when he lurched for the document. But one of Adrian's men stepped forward just enough to block him without touching him, a single polished shoe crossing the floor with measured finality. Elena picked up the pen from the table. The barrel was warm from the lights and smooth in her fingers. Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came out when she signed her name in one clean line. Adrian took the paper from her, then held out his hand. Not a performance, not a rescue, an invitation. Elena looked at it for one beat, then placed her hand in his. Around them, the ballroom lights glowed softer, and the music that had been strained and uncertain all evening finally settled into silence. Daniel stared at the joined hands, then at the empty space where his certainty used to be. "You came here to humiliate me," he said, his voice thin now, stripped of its polish. Elena lifted her chin. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "No," she said. "I came here to leave you where you left me, behind." Adrian's thumb brushed once over her knuckles, a small, deliberate motion that said everything the room had failed to understand until now. The men near the entrance opened the doors, and a cooler wash of night air slipped in, carrying the clean scent of rain from the stone terrace outside. The guests parted as Elena and Adrian turned toward the exit, their reflections passing over the mirrored walls, over the long table, over Daniel, standing alone beside his own undone future. At the threshold, Elena paused just long enough to glance back. The chandeliers still burned overhead, brilliant and indifferent. Daniel was still there, but he was no longer the center of anything. Elena stepped into the night beside Adrian, and the doors closed softly behind them like the final note of a song.